1. To start this off, I have always been one of the biggest skeptics of ghosts and the paranormal, but an experience a few weeks ago may have changed my mind. I haven't mentioned this story to anyone yet because I felt crazy for a few reasons. But here it goes. A couple weeks ago, a buddy of mine went out of town with his family for a few days and asked me if I could watch his dogs for a few days. His family had recently moved into a new house in a town about 30 minutes away. So instead of traveling back and forth, I opted to stay the night to watch the dogs. Now, just a side note, the house backs up to a big forest, and only a few weeks prior to this, they had a huge tree fall and smash into their back deck, nearly missing the house. I arrived on Friday evening, and having known the family and dogs for a while, I was comfortable with watching them, so it was no big deal. To pass the time, I thought it'd be a nice time to drop some LSD. I may catch some hate or doubt from this sub, but I am reasonably experienced with this drug, and I don't see it as having any correlation to my experience, but it's worth noting. After about 3 to 4 hours of tripping, I started to come down, and this is where things get weird. It's around midnight, and I'm down in the basement playing pool when I start to hear the dogs running around upstairs. Nothing unusual. That is, they both come running down into the basement, full speed as if they're chasing something. Something that I could not see. It looked like something I can only explain as a visible ball of air coming towards me. I immediately get a feeling of static electricity all throughout my body. The dogs both are barking at me, and in my somewhat altered state of mind, get a little unnerved and decide to leave the basement. I go upstairs and decide that I'm a bit out of it, and shouldn't rush to conclusions, so I relax and put on the TV. The dogs have calmed down and are laying nearby, when all of a sudden I start to feel the static rush in my body again. Then I notice, not only am I feeling this, but the dogs are both reacting by shivering and their hair standing up. I also noticed houseflies that I hadn't noticed before start getting active. Then the dogs both look up as if they see something and begin to react again to what I can only explain as a static ball of air. They both are following it around the room I'm in until it feels as if it lands on me, and I get that rush of static energy throughout my body. Eventually it did subside again, but I could not help but to feel freaked out and did not want to sleep the rest of the night. There was 1 or 2 more times where the static feeling entered the room again, but the ball of air, as I call it, did not come back. It was one of the most unnerving experiences of my life, and I don't know what to make of it. Not to mention the thought that a tree just recently fell and almost destroyed the house was ever present in my mind. The next day I did not have any experiences, and I went to bed well before midnight, still feeling uneasy about what had happened the night before. I haven't told anybody of it because I just feel I sound insane. Not to mention I even questioned myself because of my state of mind at the time. But deep down I know I wasn't just tripping because the previous 3 to 4 hours until then, I was perfectly okay. I just would like to know what you guys think to clear the air. Thanks. 2. There are some things in my life that have truly terrified me. Things I could never really explain. They just happened. I guess that's par for the course when you're dealing with the supernatural. I will write some of the things down now. I cannot offer any real explanations as to why they happened to me and my family. Only that they did. When my parents rented the big 2-story house on Cairns Avenue, I was tickled to death. It was a huge 3-bedroom home with a little park directly across the street. My 2 sisters and I would share a bedroom, and my brother would have his own bedroom for the first time in his young life. He had always had to sleep on the couch until now, so he, of course, was plenty happy. This soon changed once we came to realize that the house was haunted. Since I was the oldest child, I had to help Mom with the unpacking. I made trip after trip up the stairs to put things in their new places. My parents' room was to the right as you reached the stair landing. My brother Billy's room was the first bedroom as you turned left at the stair landing. We girls had the bedroom at the very end of the hall, down from Billy's room. All of the rooms had huge walk-in closets. My sisters and I laughed at how much our new bedroom resembled a hospital infirmary. The way our 3 beds were lined up made us think that way. I took the bed nearest the walk-in closet. Big mistake. Although I didn't know it then. There was also a bathroom upstairs, and it too had a walk-in closet. Will noticed a stain on the hardwood floor the day that we moved in. My dad installed hardwood floors for a living. Sanding stains from hardwood floors was an easy thing for him. He sanded it out a few days after we moved in. This was the nicest home we had ever lived in. We felt fortunate to have been able to afford it. There was a screened-in back porch for us to enjoy when spring and summer rolled around. Us kids envisioned the summer nights we would camp out there. Little did we realize that we would be long gone once summer came. We finally finished the bulk of our unpacking, and it soon came time to go to bed. That's when the strange and eerie events that we experienced there began. They started innocently enough. My parents heard footsteps of someone coming up the stairs. They thought that one of us kids had gone downstairs to the refrigerator or something. Mom called out to see which one of us it was, but no one answered. The footsteps stopped right outside of their bedroom at the top of the stair landing. Mom and Dad both sat up in their beds and looked at the doorway. But they saw no one. Finally, they both went to sleep. They asked us all the next morning if we had left our beds in the night and gone downstairs. None of us had. It spooked us, though, when they told us that they had heard someone on the stairs. One night in December, my parents sent us children to bed early, as they stayed downstairs to watch TV for a while. As I laid there in my bed, next to that closet, an event occurred which terrified me. I was the only one awake in the room at the time. My sisters were already asleep. Lucky them. As I laid there, I began to hear a faint sound of musical notes being played. At first it sounded far off in the distance, then it became louder. I looked around in the dark in puzzlement when it dawned on me that the sounds were coming from the closet beside my bed. Chills ran up my spine. I listened as the sound became louder by the second. I felt as if whoever or whatever was making the sound knew it had my total attention. I was frozen in fear. The sound coming from my closet was tinny. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like someone was plucking on nails that stuck out of a wall. It was being done in such a way as to make a melody. It wasn't an unpleasant tune. It's just that it wasn't supposed to be happening at all. Finally, I was able to move. I bolted out of that bed and ran downstairs to where my parents were. I was crying hysterically by this time, and it took me a few minutes to explain what was happening. Dad and Mom went with me up to check the closet. Well, Daddy did the checking. Mom and I just kind of held back a bit near the bedroom door. Wouldn't you know it, though? The room was now quiet. No musical notes wafting out of the closet. Nothing out of the ordinary was there at all. Dad told me to come look for myself. Nothing. Nobody was playing musical nails. My parents tried to convince me that I had been dreaming and that I just thought it was real. I just agreed with them. I mean, it was pointless to argue with them that a 7th grader knew the difference between a dream and reality. If I was dreaming, I would hope that my subconscious mind would be clever enough to come up with a more appropriate musical instrument than nails. A guitar or a piano, maybe. Heck, why not a kazoo? My parents went back downstairs after tucking me in. There I was, all alone again in the dark. My sisters slept through the entire incident. As soon as I was about to drift off to sleep, the musical nail sounds began once more. This time I screamed. My sisters woke up then. I made sure of that. My parents ran back upstairs. They were pretty mad at me this time. I begged them to let me sleep in their room. They wouldn't hear of it. They did make one consolation, though. They asked my sister on the far side of the room to switch beds with me. Mary didn't mind. She's a sound sleeper anyway. Of course, no one ever heard the sounds that night, except for me. Ghosts seem to take a special delight in making you appear loopy to your family and friends. Luckily, the rest of the night passed uneventfully. A few nights later, though, it would be my brother Billy's turn to appear loopy. Billy was asleep in his room when he began to hear a soft moaning coming from his closet. As he listened, he heard the moaning become louder. I knew what that was like. But what caused him to bolt from his room in terror was the sound of his Matchbox car collection being hurled onto the closet floor by some unseen force. Billy loved his Matchbox car collection. He kept them parked neatly on the closet shelf. So you can imagine the fear he felt when he heard them all crash onto the floor. Especially since no one was in the closet. Heck, no one was in his room except himself. At least, no one that any of us could see. By this time, all of us kids were starting to think that there was something not quite right about our new house. We started asking other kids in the neighborhood if anything strange had ever happened in that house. We did learn from the neighborhood children that a man had died there many years before. It seems he suffered from a brain tumor and suffered much pain. He eventually died in what was my brother's bedroom. Billy was ready then to give up his bedroom and sleep on the couch once again. My parents wouldn't allow that. They tried telling us that the neighborhood kids were just pulling our leg. But my siblings and I knew that even if no one had really died in that house of a brain tumor, that didn't mean that something hadn't happened there that caused our house to be haunted. You would have thought that our parents would have been the first ones to realize that the house was indeed haunted. Both of my parents had seen ghosts quite recently before we moved in there. Dad had his ghostly encounter the November before. My grandma died suddenly and we had to go to Maryland for her funeral. We stayed at my grandparents' home that night. Daddy slept upstairs just outside of the bedroom where us kids slept that night. There was a bed set up on the landing. Daddy couldn't sleep, so he decided to sit up and smoke a cigarette. Now, you young and impressionable people out there, do not try this at home. Anyway, Daddy said that as he sat there smoking, he heard someone coming up the stairs. He waited to see who it was. He got quite a shock. It was Grandma. She spoke to Daddy saying, "Everyone thinks that I'm gone, but I'm still here." She then vanished before his eyes. Needless to say, Daddy didn't get any sleep that night. Mom had her ghostly encounter just the summer before we moved to Kearns Avenue. My parents were fighting, and my mom went out on the porch to cool down. It was just after midnight. We lived up in what they call a holler, meaning it's totally in the boonies. There were no streetlights within a 20-mile radius of this place. The locals called Dry Holler. On moonless nights, you could literally not even see your hand held in front of your face. It was eerie. I hated living there. Mountain lions would come down off the mountain and rummage through our garbage at night. Oh, sorry. Back to the ghost. Mom was sitting out on the porch when she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. She looked over and saw a man walking towards her. She thought she recognized him as a neighbor from up the holler. She spoke to him, saying, "Tucker, what are you doing out here so late at night?" As she said this, he walked right through our car bumper and vanished. Mom screamed. All of us kids woke up terrified. Mom told us later that he seemed to have been dressed in an old Civil War uniform. So you would think that my parents would have been keen to the possibility that we had a problem hunting, right from the get-go. Maybe they did think that. They probably didn't quite know how to handle this, though. I mean, they had never had to contend with a ghost actually in our house. Soon thereafter, I had my own ghostly encounter. I saw the one and only ghost that I hope to have to see in my lifetime. I was still the proud owner of the bed across the room. You know, the one that was as far as I could get from that closet. It was in the middle of the night when this event occurred. I was awakened by something. I still to this day do not know what it was that woke me. I wish I'd slept through it, but no such luck. I woke up startled by a distinct feeling that I was being watched. I then heard something rustle in the darkness. I looked over at the doorway and stared straight at terror. There in the doorway stood someone just looking in at us as we slept. The person was dressed in an odd, flowing, dark hooded robe. The freakiest thing, though, was the feeling that I was looking at something that was purely evil. I was so scared. I couldn't run from the room as this thing stood right in the doorway. It was blocking the only way to get to my parents' room. I finally did the only thing I could do. I covered my head up. When I ventured a peek much later, thankfully it was gone. Soon, not soon enough, it was daylight. I asked my mom if she had come to our door during the night to check on us. I was hoping against hope that my mom had bought a long, flowing, dark hooded robe and worn it for the first time during that night. Of course, she said that she hadn't gotten up during the night. Neither had our dad. About this time, things got worse. My dad and mom were realizing that we definitely had a problem. They were continuously being awakened by footsteps coming up the stairs at night. Daddy even waited at the top of the stairs to see whoever it was. He said that he felt coldness pass over him as the footfalls made their way to the landing, where he stood watch. The stain that Daddy had sanded off the floor of the bathroom closet returned. We all thought it looked like a stain made by blood. Mom became so afraid of being alone when Dad went to work, and us kids went off to school. She would be upstairs making up the beds when she would hear the sound of a man moaning. She said that it would follow her into all of the bedrooms, and even into the bathroom. She finally began to stay downstairs until we children came home from school. What finally convinced my parents to move, though, was this. Mom had a friend come over one morning for coffee. Brenda lived 2 doors down from us. Mom decided to walk her to her house when she left. Mom didn't go in. She just walked down the sidewalk. So our house was always in Mom's view. No one entered it. From the front, anyway. When Mom got back to the house, she said that she could hear music coming from it. It sounded like someone had a radio on inside the house. Mom reached for the storm glass screen door to go inside. The door was locked from the inside. Mom had clearly not locked it before stepping out to see Brenda home. Mom thought that someone had actually broken in, and was in fact still inside. She ran down to Brenda's house and they called the police. When the police arrived, they found a window that was unlocked that they could go in through. The cop opened up the front door for Mom to come inside. He went through the entire house. Nothing was missing. No more music played. Finally, the day came for us to move out. We were so happy to be leaving this scary place. We learned from the neighbors that we had stayed longer than any of the other people who had rented the house before us. We stayed for all of 6 months. I only went back into that house once, after we had moved to a different neighborhood. I'd gone to visit a friend who lived down the street. My friend wanted me to meet the new girl who lived in our old house. No sooner had we been introduced when this girl asked me, "Is this house haunted?" I didn't lie to her. I told her that it was. She then turned to her mother and said, "See, Mom, I told you this house is haunted." Her mom just made a dismissive sound and gesture. My heart went out to the girl, though, because I knew her time living there wasn't going to be pleasant. I never entered the house again. 3. This happened to me years ago. I don't believe in paranormal stuff anymore, and maybe neither do you. Although this story may suit your interests, I hope you like it. When I was 13, I made an imaginary friend. I don't recall creating it. It was simply there. She looked like an ordinary girl and had bronze skin and short, dark hair. For a long time, she was my best friend. I talked to her all the time, mostly in my bed, telling secrets and seeking advice. As a teenager, my social life was better. I had many friends and a girlfriend. My need for this imaginary girl faded slowly, as well as the talks we had. When I was 17, though, things changed back. My life was confusing. My relationships were chaotic, and my mental health was a huge piece of shit. I was fucking depressed. I began talking to the girl again. Even though we didn't meet so much, she was always there for me, just like before. At the time, I was going through a phase of studying occultism, chaos magic, tarot, and whatnot. I was curious about the girl and decided to ask the cards about her. I turned off the lights, lit up some candles, and shuffled the deck. I asked 3 questions. What was her nature? What was my nature for her? And what was our nature together? The cards I got were the Hierophant, the Devil, and the Strength. I believed it meant she saw illness in me and thought she could help me. Together we had control and strength. After that, I did something else. I had cut lots of paper squares, each one with a letter. I took out 3 consonants and 3 vowels. The letters spelled Jashuhe. Perhaps her name was Joshua. Perhaps it was Jeshua, the Aramaic name of Jesus, or something else. I don't remember why, but I thought she was trying to trick me. I didn't want her in my life anymore. I forbid myself from speaking to her. I remember she was sad, but I felt that was the right thing to do. I never saw her again. Funny thing, my life got better. 4. I went this weekend on a trip over to a neighboring city to celebrate my 2nd-generation cousin's graduation of his master's program. We partied on Friday and spent Saturday afternoon chilling at his house with his family. That same evening, we hit up a new mall that had been built near his home and spent time there. When we headed back to the parking lot and started saying our goodbyes, I asked him if he had any ghost or paranormal stories to share. He did. Our families come from a rural town in Mexico. It started off as a mining town in the 1500s, and has since not really grown much. My cousin was raised in his grandparents' house, which would forever leave him terrified of any ghost terror stuff. The house was haunted, and I asked him in what ways. How did you know it was? Cousin. Well, for starters, every time you were inside, you could always feel like something was there. Something was always watching you. You could feel a dreaded coldness come over you. If you left your keys on the lock hanging, you could see them slowly start to swing in a circle and not stop. Me. Damn, man. Was that it? How old were you? Did anyone else notice this? Cousin. I only lived in that house till I was 8, but the haunting started way before I was born. As for the other things, we used to have a big picture of a nun, I think in the 2nd floor. One day my grandmother was coming down and she swore she heard snickering laughter behind her. When she turned around and saw the nun laughing at her. Since then, she refused to go upstairs. You know my brother, right? We were terrified every time we had to go up there in the night. We were afraid that one day something would be waiting for us in the dark. Me, damn. Any idea how or why that house was haunted? Cousin. Well, my grandfather used to say he was responsible for it. He was renovating the house and one day had to tear down a wall. Upon doing so, he revealed a small room that had been hidden. Inside were just a few jars with a few random items and coins. Unfortunately, the breaking of the wall destroyed one of the jars. Me. I think he pissed something off. I think something was lying in there, dormant with his treasure. Cousin. Maybe. The townsfolk used to say that the house used to belong to a family that had an only daughter, but she was killed on the day of her wedding, and her ghost haunts that area. From there, nothing else was talked about, other than that he since then has been afraid of any terror-related happenings. The house to this day still stands, but is abandoned. I had been to it once, before knowing this information, but I plan to investigate it now, the next time I visit the town. 5. My co-workers are convinced our cinema is haunted. Me? I'm not so sure, though weird things do happen there. Just for a bit of background, the cinema was built in the 1930s and has 4 screens. It's a very beautiful building with a lot of character, so it's the perfect setting for a ghost, right? The screen 4 Bar's story. So I've worked at the cinema for 5 years. After a year or so, I spoke to one of the managers, Andy, and told him that screen 4 sometimes gives me the creeps. He paled and told me that he felt the same way, but never told anyone, because he was afraid they'd take the piss. We both sometimes got this weird feeling in there, as if someone was watching. At times when I've been cleaning in there, I've seen a shadow slowly move across the room at the front, as if someone is walking past. But of course, there's no one there. I've since found out several people have seen this too. About a year later, I was talking to another manager, Dee, while on close. Dee told me that she hates being in screen 4 when we're closed too. When we close the building, we place Clark bars on the fire exits in order to secure the doors. The bar is kind of U-shaped, and they go upwards, into a slot at each end. It is then secured, with a big pin going through the slot and the end of the bar. Inside screen 4, we have a door at each side with fire exits, and there is a fire exit in the corridor near screen 4. So, Dee told me that years ago, she shut down projection in screen 4 and put the bars on the fire exits inside screen 4. She put the bar on the corridor and walked away. When she got to the top of the corridor, she heard a clatter sound and looked around. She saw the bar was on the floor, halfway up the corridor. Dee said she didn't get freaked out at the time. She just put the bar back and carried on. I refused to believe Dee at first because I was convinced she was trying to scare me, seeing as we were on the closing shift together. She swore she was telling the truth, so I hesitantly believed her. In the next few days, I asked the other managers if they had ever heard Dee's story, but they hadn't, so I quietly decided Dee was pranking me, and I thought no more of it. Fast forward a couple of years, and Andy was on the closing shift with a couple of guys called Josh. One of them was training as a manager, so he went with Andy to shut down projection in screen 4, while the other Josh put the bars on in screen 1, which is basically on the other side of the building and on another floor. Andy and trainee Josh put the bar on the corridor near screen 4, before going into the projection box and doing the other 2 bars. When they came out, they saw the bar from the corridor door on the floor, and to the side, so it didn't just fall off, because it would have fallen down. Andy was convinced the other Josh was trying to mess about with them, because they knew Dee's story, so they asked him over the radio, but he said he was nowhere near screen 4, because he'd been busy at screen 1. Andy didn't believe him, so he put the bar back on, and the 3 of them went into the office to look at the CCTV. They saw the bar just come off and fly to the side. At this point, Andy was freaking the hell out, so they set the alarm and got out of there. Andy was working the next day and was telling people on shift about it, and went to show them the CCTV, only to find that it had erased itself, only for that camera, in that time frame. The Amos ghost. The other main story that my co-worker Rob loves is this one, that we refer to as the Amos ghost. So one time he was on shift when another co-worker, Amos, scared him by hiding around a corner and saying his name. Amos has got quite a distinctive voice. It's very easy to recognize as his. Rob laughed it off and didn't think much else of it. A day or so later, Rob and I were on shift with someone else called Kim. We came downstairs to the tills and said, "Is Amos here? I just heard him say my name." We were confused because he definitely wasn't on shift, and we hadn't seen him come in to watch a film or anything. We would have known if he was here, because one of us would have had to have processed an employee pass on the tills. Kim said she was walking down the corridor, and she heard Amos's voice quite close to her, calling her name a couple of times. At this point, Rob had been reading up on spirits, etc., imitating people's voices, so he totally believes in the Amos ghost. A few days after, Kim heard Amos when he wasn't in the building. Another girl called Emma had a similar experience in the same corridor, if I remember correctly. She said she heard his voice fairly close to her ear, whispering, "Emma," again a couple of times. She had heard about it when it happened to Kim, so, spooked, she ran to the tills where Rob was and told him about it. As she finished telling him, the radio started blasting out static, which creeped them out further. Rob still gets really scared to think of this at any point. I know he really believes it, and scares himself further reading up on this kind of thing. I'm not sure at all. And when it comes to the static on the radio, I think that was just interference. Any thoughts or opinions are welcomed. If I hear more, I'll add to this. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, Episode 12. Thank you very much to all the individuals who wrote and shared the stories on Reddit, and who gave me very kind permission to narrate them here for you guys on my YouTube channel. Well, we are now in September. That means I'm going to have to get my finger out and get to work on that next 30 stories special. I've already got about 5 of them so far, so it should be okay over the next couple of weeks getting the rest. And I I'm going to try and force myself to space the workout a little this time. That's the plan anyway. Other random thoughts. Just things that happen in the day. That's kind of what I do here. I probably should start a vlog, really. Anyway, I was out today, and I was in the local supermarket, and thinking to myself, probably about time I upgraded my razor. And it's been about, 12 years since I bought a new one, and it's getting harder and harder to find the cartridges for the one I've got. For the past year or so, I've actually found it better just to buy them off Amazon, because it's pretty good. I just go on, pay with my card, and they go through the letterbox, don't even have to go up for them. But I figured, you know what, eventually I probably won't even be able to get them there. So I decided I would try a new razor. So I couldn't even pick one out, though, without reaching into my pocket, turning the data on my phone, and searching bloody Google to see what the best one would be for me. So I eventually picked something out. It got me thinking, what on earth did I do before the internet? I obviously got by somehow. I mean, I've only had my own web connection since I was in my early 20s. And I certainly didn't have a smartphone back then. In fact, mobile phones were about the size of a Tyrannosaurus Rex back in the day, and the reception was terrible. Oh right, that's a slight exaggeration. I think my first cell phone was actually a Motorola one, and it was a decent little phone. Did me for a while. Eventually upgraded. I got it was a little flip phone, a little silver flip phone, which I got for the pure reason that it did flip open just like they did in the original Star Trek series. And I'm sure I'm not the only person, the person that did that. So I gave the old Motorola to my mother, actually, and it did her quite well till some not very nice person stole it from her bag, and this was very many, many years ago. But yeah. Anyway, that is the saga of Hellfreezer's early phone and internet use. I hope you enjoyed it. And with that, I think I'm going to head off now. Get to work on a bit of editing, a bit of this, a bit of that. Probably make dinner. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.